Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our Connect session, which is Crackdown, Surviving the War on Drugs with Garth Mullins. I would like to start by introducing our elder, Susie McPherson-Durendy, who will open with a few words. Susie? Susie, you are muted.
Good afternoon, everyone. Greetings from Brandon, Manitoba. So I want to start with some words in Cree and an acknowledgement that is a bit of a story that I've come to share, come to know, and then come to share with different places that I go. Then I'll sing the welcome song. Gisemandu ginanaskimit dananos gagisagach. Sa wenamanan gaminopimatia. Wichi hinan ganawenamanan anos wabake gamadatagisagaw. Wichi hinan ganawenamanan gachganoninanan gajwasamasa. Nabewak squesisak. Nabesisak. Bigama gachgano awenage yapajiguta anos. Minanan enanosawan egominomachi hoan. I want to acknowledge the ancestral territory of the Indigenous nations who were and continue to be on these lands. The 600 plus Indigenous nations that were here across Canada prior to European contact. Unique and distinct societies with their own languages and systems of governance. Living, surviving, and thriving peoples who knew the land, the waters, the skies, the patterns of weather and animals, who looked after themselves, each other, their communities, and their nations, and who saw themselves as a part of creation and lived as such, always mindful of the generations to come. So this afternoon, we look to the east, to the south, the west, and the north. We acknowledge the Indigenous nations across the land and their ancestral story, truth, and wisdom that has carried over time to this day. We acknowledge how the story unfolded over time. We turn full circle to the east. We acknowledge all the nations who now make this land their home. Those who came as guests, visitors, settlers, newcomers, immigrants, refugees. We acknowledge their story too and all that they brought here. And may we be mindful of each and every one of our stories that is connected to the Indigenous worldview story that was happening here. So we give thanks for this day, for this time together, for each one here, for the story of each of our lives, all that we hold and carry, and the journey that we are on. So I say egosane nananaskamon gachanona wakamaganak. Let's thank you. I am grateful, all my relations. So I'm going to sing the welcome song. The welcome song is a song that is sung by an elder in Saskatchewan. Tobacco was offered to them by a couple of our women from here to bring this song here so we could sing it. I really like the welcome song for the way that it welcomes the 7 directions, the 4 and then above, below, and within. I think of it as a song that grounds us and centers us to this time and for the purposes that we're gathering. And I also think of it as a song that welcomes whatever each one of us needs here this day, whether it's a spirit of hope, of courage, of healing, of learning and unlearning. And so, sing this song. Hey, ay, ay, hey, ay, ay, hey, ay, ay, oh, hey, oh, hey, hey, ay, ay, oh, hey. Thank you.
Thank you, Susie. So just to review the process today, the format is going to be, we'll be giving Garth about 40 minutes. Garth will share some of his stories, and do a little bit of a reading from his book. We ask that if you have questions, and I'm not sure if everybody's device is the same, but on the bottom there should be a Q&A. And if you could please put any questions in the Q&A box, and we'll do questions at the end. So next, I would like to introduce our executive director, Jay Stewart, and Jay will be moderating the questions, and then at the end we'll just kind of do a final piece. So Jay joined Mom Stop the Harm as executive director last fall. His most recently spent nearly 7 years as Chief Communications and Marketing Officer for BC's Women's Health Foundation. Before that, he spent nearly a decade with Pivotal Legal Services in Vancouver's downtown east side, where he held numerous responsibilities, including chair of Pivot Foundation, vice chair of Pivot Legal Society Board, and later was as a staffer where he served as Director of Development. His earlier experience working in the downtown east side came through 6 years with Union Gospel Mission as its manager and communications, and later as manager of community. So welcome, Jay.
Thank you, Antoinette. Thank you very much for that lovely introduction. Today, it is my great thrill and honor to be able to introduce you to Garth Mullins in just a moment. And this is genuinely a thrill for me. I've been a long admirer of Garth's advocacy. I'm a devout Crackdown podcast listener. And I think that it's outstanding that Garth's been able to put together Crackdown, Surviving and Resisting the War on Drugs, the new book that's out on Penguin Random House Canada. Really excited to hear what Garth has to share with us today. But whether it's as a musician, as an activist, a podcaster, or an author, Garth checks a lot of boxes in terms of the talent, knowledge, and experience on the front line working in community, and is someone that I greatly admire and look up to. So I'm really, really thrilled to be able to have the chance to speak with him today. A little bit daunting, turning the tables on a really talented and gifted podcaster that I have to be the one to kind of interview him and ask him a couple of questions. So bear with me, it's big shoes to fill, but it is my pleasure to introduce everyone who's here today to Garth Mullins.
Thanks, Jay. What an introduction. Thank you. And thank you, Antoinette, and Elder Susie. Thank you for the opening us up in a good way. My name is Garth Mullins, and I am coming to you from the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. And, I sort of think about Indigenous people in Canada were the first to face prohibition. The Indian Act was the first piece of legislation that banned substances and tried to regulate and control how people felt, what was in our bloodstream. And Indigenous people, or what the Act describes as registered Indians, were the first people to experience the government's engineering in that way. And of course, a couple of decades later, it expanded to the entire population in 1908. But I think it's worth starting and acknowledging that fact that, like so many things in this country, Indigenous people got it first and worst. So I'm really stoked to be here, and thanks to Mom Stop the Harm. I love this organization. I first got to know y'all, I guess in 2018 when I met Petra and then Leslie, Petra Schulz and Leslie McBain, two of the co-founders. And I just realized what an amazing organization you all were building. And I thought about the role of parents and moms throughout history, and of course, Mother Jones is a big one. She said she was an organizer of coal miners in the North America, and she said, we mourn the dead, but we fight like hell for the living. And I really think that that's our mandate here today, in the middle of the overdose crisis, in the middle of the toxic drug crisis. So yeah, I'm gonna tell you a little bit about myself. I'm gonna read a little bit from the book. This is it. I just got a hold of one of these. It comes out on Tuesday, the 15th. So this is Crackdown, Surviving and Resisting the War on Drugs by me, Garth Mullins. It's weird for me to hold this because I was late to reading and late to spelling correctly. In fact, I haven't gotten to spelling correctly yet. So, I didn't, when I was younger, I didn't know that I'd be the kind of person to read a book, never mind write one. And when Penguin Random House came to me a few years ago, and said, "Would you write a book?" I was kind of shocked, and my partner Lisa Hale, who also works on the podcast, she said, "Yes, he will," and so here we are. Um, and it's part manifesto and part memoir. And the idea for me, when I started writing it, I was pulling together pieces of writing that I'd done and people that I interviewed on the podcast, and then I saw the convoy in 2022 descend on Ottawa. And I saw the level of organizing of the far right there, and they were talking about COVID, but also you could see that political tendency was planning to be targeting immigrants and trans kids. And I realized that as soon as the far right found harm reduction, that we were in a great deal of trouble. And so I really reorganized a lot of my work. I started leading general meetings in the park here in Oppenheimer Park in Vancouver and in Vandu to try and alert people about who's Pierre Poilievre, what are the far right doing, why do they care about us? Because I think sometimes we had gotten complacent because harm reduction used to be in the trenches and grassroots, and got somewhat comfortable being institutionalized and funded, in the 20 teens. And it didn't seem very politicized. In fact, we could exert a little bit of pressure on the government, and sometimes they would budge a little bit. But the far right came out. Pierre Poilievre said everything feels broken. He blamed the overdose crisis on woke liberal dope, by which he meant hydromorphone dilaudid, which is bullshit. Ask the coroner out here. Nobody's dying from dillies. It's from street fentanyl. But it doesn't matter because we have a now policy debate in the middle of a federal election that is completely devoid of facts, full of fear, full of propaganda, the same old kind of moral panic that we've seen follow drug policy all the way back to the beginning. And it feels very Trumpy, to be honest. And so the whole world is obsessed with tariffs right now. But, part of the reason that they were putting tariffs on Canada was apparently we were exporting fentanyl. So the debate in the drug policy world and politics became, how much fentanyl does Canada export? Well, you don't really need to export fentanyl. People can make it anywhere, right? And so we're not really exporting that much. But it wasn't about our deaths anymore. It was about trade, economy, globalization. And it was a real, it was a real acquiescence to that narrative when the government appointed a fentanyl czar and said, okay, well, we're going to crack down. Just going back to the same old idea of we'll just use law and order, more cops, and heavy measures to try and stamp out fentanyl. Well, we have fentanyl now because they tried to stamp out heroin. We have heroin because they tried to stamp out the thing before. And if you go back far enough, they started in 1907 just trying to stamp out people smoking opium. So you see, it's an arms race. And this kind of logic is not going to end drug use. It's going to give us the next bad thing. And we're already in a world of, dope that's contaminated with veterinary tranquilizers. So that's where we are in politics right now. And that's why I wrote a book using a lot of my own story, because I thought we do that on Crackdown a lot. I ask a lot of people to share their own stories with me and with the listeners. I thought maybe I should put my money where my mouth is, and that it's frankly just a strong way to communicate to people. Your own story, if it's true, it's hard to impeach it. This is what happened to you. So I'm going to read you a little bit, and then I'm going to talk for a bit more, and then we're going to have Q&A. But I got to say, part of this book also is I talk about how I can't see very well. And so reading it out loud is also not so easy for me. So this is from Crackdown, Surviving and Resisting the War on Drugs by me, Garth Mullins, available everywhere on Tuesday. I read the audiobook also, but I'm going to read you the prologue, and it's about 10 minutes long. It starts back in the 1990s. We all knew how Nick died, but nobody talked about it. By unspoken consensus, his cause of death was not to be mentioned. We wanted to show some sensitivity to the family, who were in full-blown denial, yet even amongst ourselves, we talked in whispers. Our crew had lost nearly a dozen from overdose. Hundreds of others were dying of overdose in British Columbia. The health board had recently declared a public health emergency. Activists had put 1,000 white crosses in Oppenheimer Park to memorialize the dead. I knew that the China white heroin going around was dangerously strong, but I'd never get through the funeral without some. Before I left the rooming house where I lived, I did a big smash. Now that I was here, the dope in my system was just something else to feel anxious and guilty about. We gathered on the sidewalk out front of Glenhaven Memorial Chapel under a holiday brochure blue sky, a rare sight in terminally gray Vancouver. Cars and trucks rumbled past. A siren screamed along East Hastings Street. Friends and family nodded acknowledgments to each other, chatting and smoking before the service got started. There were a few jackets and ties, but mostly jeans and hoodies. I was wearing a plaid work shirt, and I'd shined my boots to try and show some respect. We made our way inside the small chapel, and I picked up a program from a table by the door. It was the standard Glenhaven layout, produced for loved ones too shell-shocked to choose fonts and color schemes. Across the front of the program was a portrait of Nick with "Celebration of Life" written underneath in flowery script. I found a seat on a pew near the back. There were mumbled syllables, the odd cough and shuffling of feet. Tiny speakers dispensed church music that sounded like it was recorded on a 1980s era Casio keyboard. Nick's mother, father, and younger sister sat up front near the casket, where Nick was laid out in a suit and jacket and tie. I'd never seen him wear anything other than t-shirts and sneakers. The pews were filling up with punks, skaters, and metalheads. We all partied, went to shows, and played in bands together. Weed, MDMA, acid, mushrooms, cocaine, and binge drinking were common, sometimes even a little speed, But heroin, the few of us who used it kept quiet. We knew that junkies were considered the lowest of the low, bottom tier in the fuck up hierarchy, beneath drunks, cokeheads, and even glue huffers. In the months before his death, Nick had made some changes in his life. He wasn't partying as much. He'd started vocational training, something to do with computers. He'd put on a few extra pounds, as you do when you kick dope. He had a healthy glow. Then one night, he relapsed. Maybe he wanted to celebrate a recent accomplishment, or maybe he felt depressed, or maybe just bored. Whatever his motivation, his tolerance was low from all those months of not using. The music stopped. An officiant provided by Glenhaven took his place at the front and cleared his throat. The chapel fell silent, and he started his speech. I could tell he'd given it before because he only paused to check his notes when mentioning Nick's name. I drifted in and out of his spiel, recognizing bits of Bible verse from past funerals. It was like an old top 40 song on AM radio that I didn't especially like, but took comfort from familiar lyrics. The Nick I knew was no Christian, but I guessed his parents were. It wasn't my place to judge. In a pew 2 rows ahead, my ex-girlfriend Nina turned to look at me. I could feel judgment simmering inside her. Nina was tanned and outdoorsy. She was a vegetarian and did yoga. She was spiritual and saw magic everywhere. We went hiking, camping, and swimming together. I thought she would save me from myself and my habit. With her, I'd be someone new, someone good. At the front of the chapel, the officiant continued his speech. He leadeth me in paths of righteousness. But instead of becoming someone new, I was sneaking off to shoot dope in Nina's bathroom while she cried. Eventually, Nina asked, "Why do you love heroin so much more than you love me?" I had no answer. It was never her job to save me. She had her own problems. Now, 2 pews ahead, I could tell she knew I was using. I wished I could disappear. Yea, through I walked through the valley of the shadow of death, the officiant continued. Up at the front, a baby began to fuss. Nick's girlfriend rocked the bassinet, and the cries subsided. The baby had never met her father. Nick's parents had only met their granddaughter for the first time that day. They looked shattered. I could feel Nick's mom starting to unravel. One by one, we made our way down the aisle to pay respects at Nick's open casket. Ahead of me, someone exploded into howls of pain. When it was my turn, I looked down at Nick's body. He was lying there in his suit with his hair pulled back, his eyes closed and his face expressionless. Whatever spark had animated Nick was gone forever. I wanted to stay with him. I put my hand on his. It was cool and dry. "I'm sorry," I whispered. Nick's parents stood nearby, accepting condolences. As our crew worked its way past, I could feel Nick's mother radiating waves of grief. And something else, too. Anger, resentment, blame. I wanted to say something comforting to her. I wanted to tell her that Nick was a smart, funny, and self-effacing guy, that he'd been a genuine friend to me and to so many others. I wanted to hug her and tell her how sad I was, but I couldn't say anything. The same drug that had killed her son was now circulating in my bloodstream. I felt implicated in Nick's death. The dope in my system, an insult to his memory. I had to get out of here. Outside, I looked for our friend Ashley. I could tell she blamed herself. She'd been with Nick on the night of his death, and now I was worried that she might hurt herself. When I found her, I asked if she was okay, but she couldn't speak. I lit a cigarette and passed it to her. She hugged me and cried into my chest. She would never be the same, carrying that misplaced guilt with her until she herself died a few years later. My old roommate Liz walked up. I can't believe he's gone. We hugged. Then she pulled back, appraising me critically. She knew. Do you want to die too, like Nick? Heads turned to look. Haven't we lost enough friends? You're smarter than this. She was shaking her head. Don't be such a selfish asshole. I know, I said. Nina was standing just behind Liz. She'd been listening, and now she stepped forward. I thought she was going to join in, that I was about to get an impromptu intervention from the whole crowd. But Nina didn't say anything. Big tears started rolling down her face. This was much worse. Liz continued, when are you going to get clean? I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I said, trying to edge around the crowd. I felt unworthy of their concern. I promised to quit. I promised to get help. I promised anything to get away from these people who cared about me. I needed dope now. I walked a few blocks west on Hastings until I heard her familiar voice. Rock, down? I recognized the dealer. I scored a couple of points of heroin, folded up in flaps of discarded lottery tickets. I stepped into an alley to fix. Using outside was not fun, but it was a way to keep safe. If I overdosed, someone might see my body and call the paramedics. Maybe I wouldn't end up like Nick. I pulled up 40 units of water into my syringe and dumped both points into the barrel. I shook the rig, found a vein, and inserted the needle. I pulled back the plunger just enough to see a drop of my cold, dirty blood flag in the clear solution. Goodbye, Nick, I whispered as I pushed the plunger down, and the drugs flooded my system. I looked up. Sun shone through a jumble of electric cables, transformers, and telephone lines that snaked down the alley, held aloft by ancient wooden power poles that formed big H's. The heroin rolled through my bloodstream. My breathing slowed. My heart calmed. I let the drugs wash away the guilt. I tucked my syringe carefully back into the glasses case I kept it in. Heroin killed Nick, but I needed it to live.
Thank you very much, Garth. Thank you.
Thanks. So that is the prologue there. I just wanted to share that with y'all. I know that probably some people around this virtual table here have been in situations like this. Maybe you've played different roles at that funeral. The book starts with a funeral and it ends with one too, but it starts buried in shame, my shame, Nick's parents' shame, all of our shame. And the book ends with a blanketing ceremony for 50 of our departed comrades. And there's no shame there. We're ready to name the enemy. We're ready to keep the struggle on in their names. And we're being held close as a community by the elders from Tsleil-Waututh and Musqueam who were taking care of us. And that's a kind of a rough start to the book, but I want you to know there's a journey there. And we go through my trying to figure out how to quit drugs, trying 12-step, trying methadone, finally getting around my own shame to join up with Van Du and other harm reductionists to fight for something better. All of us losing so many people over the last 10 years, and then facing the toxic politics of the backlash. But the liberation that I find amongst so many others to get rid of the shame was life-changing for me. I never thought I'd be able to talk about this sort of thing. I never thought I'd be able to open my mouth to however many people are on this or write a book about it. I never thought anybody would want you to write a book about something like this. I just used to try and keep it quiet to myself because I was so ashamed. So at that funeral, at Nick's funeral, nobody wanted to talk about the cause of death because everybody was ashamed. I was ashamed of being a drug user. Nick's parents were ashamed of what happened to him. Of course, I changed the name. It's not Nick because I want to be respectful to the family. But I think that shame also keeps us apart, right? Like if we're a drug user or we're a parent or a relative of a drug user, the shame kind of surrounds us, and it's sort of like it's like a thick fog that you can barely talk to each other through. You can't hear the voice clearly. And it sounds like a cliche, but clearing that shame out of the way is, it's amazing. And I have met, I've met some Mom Stop the Harm parents who have traveled their own journey on that and gotten to really great places. In fact, Crackdown is going to feature a parent and a son from Alberta soon who went through that journey, and I'm blown away by it. I'm very, very recently a father myself, and in fact, 4 days ago, and so I am only now coming to understand the other side of the pew, the other side of the church in that scene. And you know, it's it's been an incredible journey. So I don't claim that this is also a redemption story or a comeback kid narrative. I don't get clean by the end of the book. Not exactly. I'm still using methadone. I had chipped very recently before the last chapter. So, but I'd found a way to stay alive, to have strong connections, to have a fulfilling life, to have all the good things that everybody want. And that's what I wanted to show people is that you don't have to be 100% abstinent to have a good life. You don't have to quit everything to be a full human being. And everybody's journey is different. And for some people, that's what they can do. That's how they get there. And I absolutely respect that. But this book is about my journey, and it's unique, but I think also people will notice things in it, like things that maybe reflect in their own life. And I'm just always looking for any platform to use to get our ideas across, right? I'm not some kind of special genius. I'm part of a movement, and we communicate the ideas of a collective of people that have been working on this for decades, and you all are part of that. We use protests to communicate the ideas. I've used music, a band, a podcast. I used to write a newspaper column before the newspaper was bought out by Post Media and shut, and a book. So however we intervene and get our arguments across, it's important. And I think it's really important right now. It's hard to have these kind of conversations in the middle of the political moment we're in, but it's no time has been more necessary. And all the people who are being targeted by the far right, by the Trumps and Poilievs and everybody, we all have to form connections with each other, right? Because these fuckers are singling out the groups who've always been singled out. Trans kids, Indigenous people, immigrants and refugees, and yeah, people who use drugs and poor people. And they're using fear. In the States and in Canada, these politicians are using fear to try and stampede voters to the right. But I think we have to come through and show a different face of all of this, and look for the solutions that we all know work, because people have spent decades testing them and researching them. And we found out that some things work and some things don't work. And right now, Pierre Poilievre is promising to try to ban the things that we know work, the things that we know keep people alive. So I didn't want to be in my 50s still talking about drugs and cops all the time. I wanted to grow up and just be, I don't know, some kind of something else. But this is the calling, right? We all want to be done with this. We all want a way I could turn fentanyl and heroin into very boring pharmaceuticals that you get from some place with a prescription, and there's some paperwork, and there's, you know what I mean? It's just like, it's not like gritty and sexy and sensationalistic for TV, or cool and fun for the kids. It's just this thing that people can access to make their lives easier and to let themselves live. I would like that. I would like that, the world of drugs and drug culture to become as boring as I feel like I am sometimes. So I wanted to conclude by thanking you all very much for for hearing me. And I'm going to tell you also, since I'm a nude dad, and I live in Vancouver, please buy the book. It's available everywhere. Like, Penguin Random House is the biggest publisher in Canada. They've bought up all the other ones, and so they have it in bookstores, big bookstores, little bookstores, the chains, everything like that. I also read the audiobook, so if you liked how I read that last little bit, you can get the whole thing, and that will help my little guy, have a life also here. So I want to say thank you, and of course, please everyone, stay safe and keep six.
Thank you very much, Garth. I was to say as well that I'm sure that everyone here today is probably already a Crackdown podcast subscriber, but if you are not, do yourself a favor, and make sure you get on board. Clearly, Garth is a very gifted storyteller. So if you've liked his time with us here today, I guarantee you're going to like the work that he's done with Crackdown, and his team there does a really fantastic job. So kudos to you. And I think that you can probably count on a lot of book sales flying off the shelves here come Tuesday, Garth. I think you got a lot of
Thanks, Jay. You can pre-order it right now. You can hit that link, and whoever you buy it off, it will send it to you, and it'll be at your door on the day. They tell me. So have at her.
Wonderful. Thank you. I was going to everyone's attention again to the function at the bottom of the page. There is a Q&A space, so you can enter any questions you like for Garth to consider. We're going to be together for about another 50 minutes here. So happy to take some questions and share them with Garth. I've got a couple of already kind of started to come in. One of the ones maybe I'll jump off with first, Garth, if you're all right, is because you've spoken about being a new dad. And you and I are around the same age. So I'm thinking about something that came back to the sort of Nancy Reagan era of the 80s and just say no. Thinking that that was what was told to me as a kid. Just say no. Don't do drugs. Don't touch them. Now, as a parent, a lot of my peers, my friends, have also seemingly applied that mantra to even talking about drugs. Not even so much don't use them, but I'm not going to talk about them. It's a taboo topic. It's too scary. It's too big. So, as a new dad, are there any strategies, any advice, anything you might consider when it comes time to have those talks with your son that maybe people who are attending today as parents or grandparents could possibly use? How would you recommend that we consider talking to our kids about drugs?
Well, I went through this with my niece, and this was several years ago now, but I wanted her to be safe. I knew that she didn't have the easiest life, and so I thought, she's gonna probably be looking for a way to soften the alienation, and she might find the same path that I did. But when I was growing up and going to high school in the 80s, there was a couple of strikes against me. For one, I got that same kind of dare education, like the just say no. We had a guy who's I can't remember what he served time for, but his probation, his release conditions were like, you got to go speak to schools. So he went to our school, and he just gave us this very like, uh, don't use drugs, you'll end up in jail and you'll get raped in jail. Don't do it, and just try to terrify everybody, right? And I was about 15, and by then it was already a little bit late for me. Like I'd already started drinking and smoking pot and stuff like that. And when I smoked pot, I was just like, I don't get it. This isn't such a big deal. Like this doesn't seem like such a big thing, and nobody in the school helped us differentiate between weed and cocaine, for example. Um, no one explained like what is addiction, what is dope sickness. And there was a guy, Premier Bill Vander Zalm at that time, and he was a fundamentalist Christian of some kind, and he was against any kind of AIDS education for students. So I was eventually a injection heroin user during the first big wave of HIV, and I was also a sex worker, and I didn't properly understand how HIV was transmitted. Like I knew it could go through syringes, so I tried to have my own syringe, but sometimes me and my buddy had to share because it was very hard to get them back in the day. So, like, just trying to make information scarce or equipment scarce made things more dangerous for me. We bleached the needles. We found out that you could do that, and so that probably helped me. But I didn't know that the virus also could live in the spoon or the cotton or like that. I didn't know, and so I was not being safe. And I'm lucky that I didn't get the virus. But and back then, um, there wasn't much you could do. You know, this was before even AZT, and but definitely before antiretrovirals. So I think that's one thing. Kids need proper information. And so with my niece, I didn't sit down and say, let's talk about drugs. I just said, hey, you you should probably know how to use naloxone. You know, you're going out to parties, you're meeting kids, like you could be a leader amongst your peers and keep people alive. And so when you train naloxone, you end up talking about all of the other stuff. And then I was when I was teaching her naloxone, I didn't have to say, I believe that you're going to use drugs because she knows that what I would want to hear is no, no, Uncle Garth, I won't ever, and so I don't ever want to make a conversation where she has to bullshit me because that sort of separates us a little bit, right? So, you know, she was allowed to ask all the questions she wanted to, in the context of just learning to keep people safe and keep herself safe too. And I think she's done a pretty good job. She's 22 now, and she mostly just uses like weed that you can get from the local weed store. She's doing pretty good. And I think that's really important. Right now, there are these myths going around that hydromorphone is, causing a new wave of, it's like another opioid crisis. And that's these drugs that are prescribed in British Columbia and maybe in in Ontario and used to be in Alberta a little bit. But it's like a cousin to heroin. It's like a minor opioid. Still pretty serious for people who don't have a don't have a who aren't wired. But it doesn't really quite compete with fentanyl. And so there's been this fear mongering campaign that kids are all going to use hydromorphone, and the things that are trouble with that is the kids have actually been using pharmaceutical pills for decades. You've been able to buy pharmaceuticals on the street, other people's prescriptions for decades. This has nothing to do with safe supply. You've even been able to buy Dilaudid on the streets for decades. I have. And Dilaudid has helped keep me separate from the street drug supply. So if a kid's going to experiment, you know, it's going to be very hard to stop somebody. Not every kid's going to experiment, but there's some who will. People like me, like whatever my parents were going to do, it wasn't going to stop me. And so knowing the difference between street fentanyl and hydromorphone is critical for kids making informed decisions. But if we just scare them and say everything's bad, what happened to me was I smoked pot and I was like, well, this is no big deal. So the everything's bad instantly fell apart. And now I was suspicious of any kind of adult information on the topic. So having kids knowing where they can get stuff tested, knowing proper information and where they can get it, I think it's critical, right? Like I hope my little guy doesn't turn to drugs, but if he does, I hope he's able to stay away from the things that could kill him. And I hope he's able to make decisions. Like young people take risks. Young people are trying to experiment. They're trying to figure out who they are. That shouldn't cause death, right? We teach young people how to ski safely all the time. I'm not saying it's the same thing, but I think to take away the information that people need to make a smart decision in hopes that they won't go anywhere near something, I think that's faulty logic.
Appreciate that, Garth. Thank you. And again, everyone, please keep your questions coming in the Q&A section at the bottom there. I'm trying to monitor as they come in and starting to see some themes emerge, some questions that are quite related and similar. One is kind of coming up around the space around stigma and shame. And I'll read here. As a podcaster, activist, and author, you speak to a lot of people. And I'm wondering if you can share any tools that you use when discussing stigma and shame and its role in the toxic drug poisoning crisis to maybe shift someone's thinking?
Yeah, the person who helped me a lot was Laura Shaver. Like I met her 2013 or something like that. She's been on methadone for a very long time. She's a drug user and a Vandu activist, and I met her when I started coming around Vandu, Vancouver area network of drug users a little more seriously. And she just showed me she just modeled how to be not embarrassed of your life and who you are. And that, um, you know, if you're a drug user and you have a habit, it becomes a big part of who you are, whether you want it to or not, because of the way that society treats us, right? You can get locked up, ostracized, fired, evicted, have your kids taken. Your whole life can get changed because of what's in your bloodstream. And so she just accepted that. It was a big part of who she was, that she could recognize the parts of her drug use that she didn't like and the things that were helping her to, um, lead the kind of life that she wanted. And she was just not embarrassed of it. And just seeing that example was really inspiring to me. Now, the difficulty is there's still lots of sanction for coming out and admitting, oh, I have a drug habit or something like that, right? Like, so everybody can't do it because you can still get fired from your job. You can still get evicted. Bad things can still happen to you. So I was able to, start talking publicly only after a very long time of dancing around the edges and not talking about it. And only when I was in a safe situation, like the people in my life, like my grandparents' generation is gone, and they wouldn't have understood, and my parents have been challenged by it, but they have been still standing by me. And so I haven't had to pay like these huge prices. I have a union job. They can't just fire me for something that I say publicly like that. I have a stable housing situation, so I can't get evicted just for they don't want drug users in here or something. So it's shame comes from really material circumstances too. So like having your life such that um, the things that are the shame causers are lessened is very helpful. But I carried a lot of my own shame, and I needed to see people just being proud of who they were. And I also realized in seeing Laura Shaver's examples that she was fighting to save people's lives. She was fighting to change policy, to change the world, to end the drug war. And that part of that fight was her just being honest and true and proud of who she was. And I was like, well, if I want to be in that fight, I want to do that too. I don't want to hide half of who I am. I want to be my whole person. And that was incredibly liberating. And I do talk about that in the book. I do talk about meeting Laura and like admiring her political fire and trying to get there myself. So I think that's a big part of it. But finally, the source code for shame and stigma is the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act. That is the piece of legislation that makes it a criminal penalty to possess drugs. And as long as we have that, and as long as it's a criminal penalty, we're still going to have stigma and shame. And we had a few months in Vancouver where we didn't have that, but there was a right-wing backlash. They gutted decriminalization. It all came roaring back. We got more cops than ever. So we're just back to the status quo. And it's a lot to ask people as individuals to overcome all of these structural conditions. And I think the best thing is to get people into a collective experience where they're surrounded by a lot of people like Laura, like me, who have found this path, and then we can all fight for something better together. So probably the best way to get rid of stigma and shame amongst in yourself is to join the fight.
We've some another and again, thank you everyone for your questions. Please do keep them coming in the Q&A function at the bottom of your page there. Another theme that's kind of emerging, probably not surprisingly, Garth, is the upcoming federal election, and a few different questions that are kind of circling around the same issue of with an election coming up in this country, is a possible politician person that may actually steer some healing in the direction. They referenced in examples of Italy and Portugal, but basically wondering how you feel the toxic drug poisoning crisis has been considered as an election issue.
It's terrible. I had the experience of watching a lot of elections, municipal, federal, provincial, seeing budgets and speeches from the throne and all these political moments where even though thousands of us were dying, we just weren't on the radar. And then a couple of years ago, we did get on the radar. And that was because the right wing, the far right, the conservatives, the Pierre Poilievres and all that, they put us there. And so we were suddenly on the radar, but in a terrible way. That we were something to be feared, and that they were saying that these woke liberal and NDP policies were tearing the country apart and ruining our cities. Well, I'm here to tell you this is bullshit because I've worked deeply in these policies, and they are tiny. There's 225,000 people like me in British Columbia, daily opioid users. And there were at the top 5,000 prescriptions for what they call safe supply dilaudid. That's about 2%. It is a drop in the bucket. We never had this coddled environment where the government was handing out woke heroin or something like that. It just isn't true. We haven't even been able to permeate safe injection sites or overdose prevention sites, even in British Columbia, even in Vancouver, outside of the downtown east side very much. So harm reduction, people talk like, oh, we got way too much harm reduction and not enough enforcement. Well, we don't. Harm reduction is still pilot projects and small amounts. And the big budget items are still spent on cops and jails and courts. So this specter that Pierre Poilievre raises at his rallies and in his rhetoric of super over-coddled drug users committing crimes, pooping on your lawn, terrorizing the world. This is not true. What is true is that rents across this country have gone up, and they have put a whole bunch of people right out of housing. And that is a real estate and greed issue. And no politician is willing to take that on straight either, because lots of them are landlords. Real estate is a big business, and lots of people vote who own homes. And there's nothing wrong with owning a home. Everybody should get a chance. But, if they say anything that might scare people in the equity in their home, they could scare votes away. And that's reasonable, right? Like, people have put money in their homes, and that's kind of their nest egg. And so you don't want to do that either. But this government, this country needs to build housing, not just social housing, public housing, in a huge way. So it is taking the truth, this kernel of truth, that, yeah, things are pretty fucked up because we're living in late stage capitalism, not because we've had too much harm reduction. That's bullshit. And that's the bait and switch that the right wing is playing in this election. And you can see Trump is just the extreme version of it, right? He's telling everyone he's for the little man, and he's got the world's richest asshole in his pocket. So it's just completely backwards. And I'll tell you, I'm not hiding anything. I'm a socialist. I believe that we should be sharing a lot more of the wealth. And I was very glad to see in the recent Vancouver City Council by-election that we elected a guy who's of that ilk too. Sean Orr, he's a dishwasher, punk rocker, plays in a band here, friend of our movement, and he got a council seat. So it is possible to find people who are out there and caring and who can get elected. How do we change history? Probably not from who sits in those powerful seats, but it's if we get ourselves big enough and well organized enough, and then we can change history. History changes in the streets. History changes when we organize en masse and twist the arms of government and try to compel them to make the moves that we want. And we have our work cut out for us for sure. But it is a tough time in the federal election right now. Fascism is walking the earth again, and this is very serious for everybody. Certainly people who are in marginalized groups like drug users, trans kids, Indigenous people, immigrants and refugees, but also workers. The right is hostile to workers, hostile to unions, even though they like to have rallies where they cosplay as a blue collar friend of the working man and drive up in the Poilievre's Ford F-150 and put on a country song. That's bullshit too. So don't fall for the working class cost plan or anything like that. Like I've worked in the labor movement for a long time too, and we see the hostility towards unions. But this is you know, these things are all interconnected. That the right is a mean, hostile group of people that like to target marginalized groups, um, bait and switch. And the people who vote, I understand, people like Pierre Poilievre get up and say, I'm going to make housing more affordable and I'm going to do this and that. And, you know, on the surface, it can sound good. But I think it's worth digging a little deeper. And I know people who come around Mom Stop the Harm and spend their Sundays doing something like this, listening to me running my mouth. You guys are the deeper thinkers and the policy wonks. And so I know that you've probably all got ideas in your different ridings about how to do it. And I'll bet you some of you are involved in different riding associations and stuff. And so kudos to that. Democracy is worth defending and improving.
Maybe you've kind of already touched on this a little bit, what you just said there, but there's, again, thematically kind of related to the election. There's some questions that are somewhat similar. So things like decriminalization, safer supply, safer consumption sites seeming to be getting further away, certainly through the context of an election. Like, are there specific tactics that you would recommend that people can engage in here to make sure that these things don't fall over to the far right, as you referenced, and fall off the table and become so demonized and so unpopular they become impossible to be legislated, or they become impossible to be safeguarded against? There's specific tactics that you might be willing to share, or thoughts in that regard?
Sure. I mean, the tactic that has worked in our movement has worked for lots of other people's movements too. And that is sometimes that civil disobedience. The first clean syringe, the first new in the package syringe I was ever given was given to me by somebody who was risking jail to give it to me. It was a guerrilla needle exchange that was set up in Civic Center Park in California. I didn't get a lecture, I didn't get anything, just handed me a syringe and said, "Be safe, brother." And I was blown away by this. Somebody was, even though this was illegal to do, someone was breaking the law because it was right. And then up here in Vancouver in the 90s, the first safe injection site on this country was opened illegally without permission by people like Ann Livingston, even though it was illegal, even though it was people were risking arrest. And then just the last few months, a group of doctors in on Vancouver Island, when they were closing OPSs in hospitals, they said, "Fuck it, we're just going to set them up outside," and they did. And it was illegal. And they had cops around, and I think one of them got drummed out of her job because of this. And so we don't all have to put ourselves on the line in that way, but supporting the people who do, because it doesn't just take a couple of brave doctors. There's circles of people around them helping out, making it happen, giving support. You look in your community where those things are possible, and see if those kind of actions are worth taking. But also, I live in East Vancouver, and so I don't know what it's like in Medicine Hat or wherever else. Like the context is always different, and maybe if you did something like that there, it wouldn't work and it wouldn't be right. So like people know their political context and what's so sometimes it's like fighting for Narcan training or whatever it is, whatever that inches us closer. But those struggles also build organization and build community. And you will find that those people help you out. Like I didn't intend to talk about this today, but it's just I haven't had very much sleep lately because my kid was born on Tuesday and he wasn't breathing. And they took him to the NICU, and that's where he is right now. And we've been there for the past, I don't even know, like we just been like losing time and in this place. And he's okay now. He's got an MRI and he's okay. I just didn't know what was going to happen to him. And he's breastfeeding and he's just like a perfect little guy. He's just just a regular little baby, but I didn't know whether he's going to make it at all for a while. And the community that piled in around me, I gotta say, like I've I've been working with people to try and we save each other's lives. We try to organize these sort of things, like the Drug User Liberation Front was the same thing. giving out safe supply illegally, even though it wasn't licensed. But when I needed help, all these people just piled in, and we got food and lifts here and there, and people searching out like a breast milk pumping machine. And I was so moved. And that's not only what makes the world better, it makes your life better. So you use the tactic of civil disobedience, of mass organizing, but just bringing people close to you. And I've done my share of bringing people food and visiting the hospitals and stuff like that. But when it was happening to me, I just was, that's the world that we want right there. That's what we want. And that's how you get it. You fight together, you know?
Thank you. And again, everyone, please keep the questions coming. There's some really great ones coming in using the Q&A function at the bottom there. And I like how these are kind of actually organically coming together and kind of complementing one another. So, Garth, you just referenced the drug user liberation movement. So question, what are the best tactics for connecting those movements that you've seen, Garth?
Well, I guess over the last year or two, myself and some people from the Canada Drug Policy Coalition, we've been working in the union movement, trying to um, let unions know that that the union movement in Canada has pushed for lots of progressive reforms for Canadian workers. That we have, well, parental leave, for example, which I am on right now. We have that because people like the postal workers went on strike back in the day. And so we need that same kind of militancy for overdose. But it's a Canadian workers issue as well. And so I think that sort of solidarity and using the tools that we've seen in the labor movement before, and whatever movement you're in, or whatever movement um, it can help. And then these movements can grow links towards each other. So also, I've had some discussions not so long ago with like Naomi Klein about how disaster capitalism and the climate crisis and drug policy and prohibition all kind of intersect and lead up to each other. And those are early days, those discussions, but I think that there's a lot because, I see if you're concerned about climate change, well, lots of the West gets flooded and catches on fire every year. And so that means that all these drug users or people on methadone or whatever get evacuated from their town, and they're on top of being scared, they're dope sick, and the drug supply chains get disrupted. So I think forming those links, you can kind of see that the overdose crisis affects different movements differently, and that there's also nobody who's a drug user who's not also like a worker or an indigenous person or a trans person or whatever. Like people who are targeted in one way or another, we wear multiple identities. They all intersect, right? So, I think finding those connections is really important. A couple of years ago, I worked alongside Gabrielle Peters on connections between like the disability movement and overdose. And when they were thinking about extending MAID into um, people with mental health issues or whatever, a lot of disabled folks and activists kind of gathered around to figure out what that would mean and how would they be imperiled or helped or whatever. And it was great to be invited to be part of that debate. So I think that you can see there's loads of overlap. We just have to look for those opportunities and start where you are. If you're part of if you I don't know, volunteer at a high school or something, like maybe they need an Arcan kit or a teachers union, or wherever you are is a good place to start organizing. I remember having a conversation with this guy Ewan Thompson a few years ago, and he was saying the exact same question: what's the right place to start? And he said he was in the craft beer industry, and I said, great place to start. Like small business people. Don't let the UCP in Alberta like just have their vote. And he has organized each and every, and my God, it's just incredible what that guy has done. So like wherever you are, it's a good place to start.
I know that we're privileged to have Ewan with us here today, so definitely a
Oh,
shout out
right
there to
on. Well, I
Ewan.
hope
So
I captured that conversation properly, Ewan.
that's great, thank you. We talked about a lot of kind of what's broken, what's kind of effed up, and what's not working so great right now. A question from Shay that's kind of more on the positive side of things. Can you talk about maybe a recent win that you've had?
Um, well, shit, I might have to come back on that one. Yeah,
No problem.
it's been, I won't lie, it's been pretty hard lately. We're seeing a lot of deprescribing happening uh, in British Columbia, like people getting deprescribed off of different alternatives to the street drugs and that stuff. So it's a little bit difficult. And we've also seen on the downtown east side here something called Task Force Barrage get a whole bunch of cops just doing super visible policing. So the neighborhood, the character of the place is just so different that it's very ominous right now. And so it's a little hard for me to you know what, I'll try and think of something by the end. I guess what it is we did see the number of overdose deaths come down in British Columbia by 15% last year, I think, or it could have been less than that. I'm trying to remember the numbers. But I just I guess I'm a little unsure, gun shy to be optimistic about it. Of course, it's great that less people die. I just don't know why or what's going on there. And so I wouldn't claim it a victory for harm reduction or anything like that. So um but yeah, I guess what feels good to me is the Vancouver area network of drug users is still here. We were sort of threatened by the right last year and the year before, and that threat had a grave effect on the drug user liberation front, arresting a couple of the prominent leaders of that group, raiding our storefront office, seizing everything, and putting us in court. So Vandy was still standing, so that's a good thing.
Maybe I'll build off that just a little bit then, because this is something that I know at Mom Stop the Harm, we hear from members, advocates, and families every day, people who are fighting to maintain hope. And especially when you see what's happening in Ontario with the closures of supervised consumption sites in BC, abandoning decriminalization efforts and kind of warming up to involuntary treatment in places like Alberta and Saskatchewan, really embracing that recovery-oriented system that prioritizes absence and recovery seemingly over everything else, or Trump slashing Medicaid and public health programs to provide opioid addiction treatment, and it's just the general hardening politically of things overseas, kind of everywhere. One of the things I know we speak about internally with everyone that we kind of are aligned with is where does one find hope? If when everything kind of seems impossible and you look around, from province to province, down south, overseas, and everything seems to be getting bleaker and meaner and harder and more cruel and less scientific. Um, is it possible? Where might you, if you do find hope?
Well, Jay, how many people are on this meeting right now?
I don't have it in front of me, but I believe we were at 214 entered. I can
Okay, well,
possibly
there you
clarify.
go. It's a Sunday. Like we don't get that much time off, right? Everyone's so busy. And there's 214 people that are spending their Sunday on this. That to me, that's very hopeful. I find hope in my comrades. I find hope in the people that I organize alongside. That people are just so driven by what's right, by caring for each other. Just like I struggle to find the words because, well, I'm very tired, but also because everything has been turned into such a cliche. But that taking care of each other that I see amongst our comrades, even when times are really tough, even when people are so broke, they're sharing the last little crumbs with each other. We're resuscitating each other, bringing each other back, letting each other stay on our floors, like people just, going out and helping out, getting coats and whatever, like all that stuff. That's where I see the hope. It's very difficult for for the rulers and the plutocrats to build a world completely devoid of hope and human compassion when there's 214 people that are gathered around on a Sunday like this, when we do that stuff that I just listed off. And that's why I say join the fight. Obviously, we can win the fight better if there's more people that join it. But your life will be better when you join the fight. I remember there was this couple, and for a month or two, they were at every single meeting that I was at. And I just saw them constantly. And I said, Jesus, you guys, what's going on? Are you radicalizing? Are you ready to have the revolution now? And they're like, well, yeah, that too. But really, the more we organize, the less rock we smoke. And we're trying to smoke less rock. And I'm like, really? And they're like, yep, we're just trying to stabilize our usage. And this is the best way to do it. I just think it's like people feeling that warm connection with each other that we're so starved for. In fact, we're so starved for it in North America that people are easily bamboozled by these fucking right-wing maniacs. But when people are together and connected with each other and not so alienated and isolated and atomized, it's much harder for them to get us. That thirst for solidarity, that thirst for belonging, that people have been in this desert of connection for so long that they come out to like a Polyev campaign stop at a warehouse, and he says he's going to defund the CBC, and everyone cheers, and they feel this moment of togetherness in the crowd. Well, that's weaponized, right? Like that togetherness, when you don't have it, people can weaponize it. So be with each other, join the fight, be a comrade to each other because it feels good to do it. We have lost so many people. I can't count it. But we have the funerals at Vandu. We have the memorials at Vandu and at that place I was talking about when I was reading from the book at the Glenhaven Memorial Chapel. And we do it together. And it doesn't make it better, but at least it's a little better together. And that's what I can say is really, it's Joe Strummer said it best. Without people, you got nothing. You ain't got shit. So if you haven't found your people yet, that's my suggestion today. Find your people, because man, when you find your people, then you're home. Then you found that thing that you've been looking for. And if you have already found your people, you already know what I'm talking about. And so just love them.
I would say for myself as a old punk rocker of a certain vintage, we're probably all best served to listen to Joe Strummer, I suppose. So there's some good advice without any doubt there. There's a question here that just, and again, we're down to probably about 13 minutes. We'll have time probably take a handful more questions. So if you have something you've been sitting on you want to share, by all means, please pop it in the Q&A and we'll do the best we can to get to everybody. But this one, is there language or a way to help those we care about understand how supporting those in active addiction is worthy and important?
Is there language? Yeah. I don't know. I guess just humanizing it, it's like I think maybe part of the problem why people have a little bit of a barrier, at least in Vancouver here, is they drive through the city and they drive down Hastings Street and they see, in the 100 block and the 0 block, they see like this, what they describe as kind of this war-torn place, and that's what they think active addiction is. It's not. That's what our housing crisis has done, and it's like decisions of city planners and city fathers for generations. But to help them, to use the language to help them over that barrier, it's to remind people that when you finish your drive through Hastings Street and you get to work, there's people in active addiction in your workplace. If you work anywhere that's got over a dozen or more people, that we are also in your community centers, your churches, your mosque, your gurdwara, and community center, and I don't know, your pickleball league or whatever else, your curling club. Like, we're everywhere. We are legion people who use drugs. And so just remembering that that you don't have to go very far outside of your comfort zone or your little bubble, your little part of the world, because there's people right there, and as soon as you open yourself up to it, people might feel safer identifying themselves to you and what they're going through. And then you can see that like we are living in really rough times. It's like fascism and the climate apocalypse, and you can't afford anything. And so, of course, a lot of people use drugs to take the edge off. Human beings always have. And um, I think trying to erase or at least put something to balance off that TV news stereotype of the drug user fiending on Main and Hastings will help, because that image in people's head is weaponized by lots of people who make an advantage out of it.
This this question was interesting, and kind of how it kind of relates to the one we just asked there. And I think maybe you've already addressed a couple of them, but there was a question about naming, 3 things that would change the face of substance use and its challenges in Canada. You've already spoken again about using the language and kind of taking up the space and letting people know that, you're here. But are there any other top 3 things or top items that you think that
But
you would do to change the face of
sure,
substance in
I've
Canada?
talked about decriminalization and safe supply, and I talk about these things because really, I mean, if people can use an opioid that isn't going to kill them from the street, then we end the toxic drug overdose crisis overnight. And we also, if that doesn't appeal to people, we also take gasoline out of the gas tank of organized crime, and then reduce all kinds of police and healthcare budgets and all that stuff. So yeah, safe supply, decriminalization. Criminalizing people doesn't work. It just makes people more ashamed. Just fills up jails. Useless. Doesn't do anything. So, and then a third that I would say, lots of people die from drugs who are not daily opioid users like me. Like people who are just partying, maybe doing a rail of coke on the weekend. We have, in the West, we have people who work really hard in the resource sector. I used to work in mining when I was younger, and people go hard. They work hard and they like to get fucked up, and you can't blame them for that. But now it's different. Now it's deadly, right? So, there are lots of people, and we got to remind people that this isn't an addiction crisis. Because, Stats Canada says over the last 10 years, the number of people with opioid use disorder or substance use disorder has stayed relatively flat. There isn't this big crisis of people getting wired. The crisis is of people dying from this stuff, and that's people who are recreational users and weekend warriors, but also people like me who do have habits and are like the daily opioid user. And for some of us in that last category, we do use because of trauma. And that's been my problem in life, not the drugs, the trauma. And when I was able to get to somebody who understood this stuff, I got PTSD treatment about 10 years ago or a little bit more, and it changed everything for me. And I was lucky because the right person recommended the right person to me, and I had extended medical benefits at work to cover it. But there aren't very many people who have that, right? Like most people have to pay for mental health. So a third thing we could do is extend our health coverage to include your brain, right? The NDP have talked about extending it to having pharmacare coverage and dental. We need to do mental health care too, and it's way too late. We got to be doing this. We got to get on with this. This needs to be an election issue. If people in the conservative camp are really serious about treatment, I don't know why they never suggest this. I don't know why they are hostile even towards public health care, but that's what we're going to need to do. So, I think that would be the third thing that I would recommend. I mean, you could have said housing in that space. You could have said a lot of things, but it just so happens that I'm selling a book today. There's a chapter of it that's on my experience with PTSD, and so and of PTSD treatment, and it really helped me. The exact same treatment helped Guy Felicella a lot. Like, it really seems to work well for the people I've known who have trauma and drug use situations.
I'm going to pivot briefly just to back to podcast land for a moment here, Garth. If there was somebody kind of past or present, anyone that you could have a chance to sit down with and do a podcast with, is there anyone that would come to mind that would be an interesting interview subject for you?
Well, when I was 21, I interviewed Kurt Cobain. I guess I was 20. I interviewed Kurt Cobain in Nirvana for the alternative weekly that I was working for. And I was using heroin at that time and I knew he was. Like I could just tell. But I didn't talk with him about it because the shame of it. And I kind of wish I could go back and have a different conversation with him about that. I wish that he and I could have been a lot more honest. We spent a whole evening together. Me and Nirvana had and a guy who was recording the interview. We had like a meal together on the tour, and then we went to the show and watched the band, and then we hung out in their hotel afterwards. And this is just before Nevermind came out. So just before that, Smells Like Teen Spirit came out. In fact, they wrote that song, Smells Like Teen Spirit, just in the week or so after that interview. So my wife firmly believes that I'm the albino from that song, but no one will ever know. I guess I wish I could ask Kurt Cobain that question too, but really what I wish I could do is go back and have a much more honest conversation with him than all this bullshit we were talking about musical influences and record labels and we both like some cheesy metal or whatever like this. I mean, it was still a fine interview, but I just right now I wish I could try it again without the shame.
Well, if I were you, I would own that. I would steal that. I would lay claim to that and tell people that that is the reference and that's all because of you. I would take that if I were you. Um, Maybe just in the last few moments here, you spoke about kind of going back and revisiting conversations that had shame related to them. I'm curious, have you had the chance to, and you spoke again in your opening reading from the from Nick's funeral. Um, have you had the opportunity to kind of go back and had different relationships and conversations with some of the people you ran with, some of your peers, some of your friends and their parents and families? Has there been able to be any kind of coming together or fence mending or reconciliation, anything like that? Has that changed over time for you in some of those relationships?
Yeah, I think my relationship with my own parents is a lot different. You know, I just I just was very distant from them. I guess the book charts it, but like when I was around 10, I was in the care of somebody who shouldn't have been taking care of children. It didn't work out well. And after that, I just didn't feel safe around anybody. And so I was very distant from them. And I didn't feel like I had a very close relationship up until more recently. And my mom listens to every episode of the podcast. And I sent them a manuscript of the book because I didn't want to say anything about them that they wouldn't want said publicly. I wouldn't want to share anything about their lives that they didn't like. So I don't talk about them very much. They're private people. And their stories are theirs to tell, not mine. And I but my relationship with them both is a lot better in more recent years than it was before. And I think that's because I was able to get shame out of my way and just be honest of who I was, and that also for them that they were accepting of who I am.
Wonderful. Maybe the last question. A few have come in that are again sort of election related. Clearly, that's on a lot of folks' minds as we get into the last couple of weeks of the campaign. Do you have any? I know we've touched on some of these, but couple questions sort of. Do you have any thoughts on what you might say to people who are thinking of voting in the right wing direction? And about making our cause and making drug policy an election issue. Maybe any kind of parting final thoughts on the election as we get ready to cast our ballots in a few weeks.
I think it's good for people if they're thinking about voting for Polyev. Like, I understand why, right? Because he says things like everything feels broken, and it does feel broken, right? So when parties of the political center, liberal parties, the NDP, and they're sort of like, well, things are fine. Maybe we'll have some little tweaks or whatever. That doesn't resonate with my reality. But I think what people ought to do is look at the history of the right and where the right comes from and who they are, who their real constituency is, right? The right wing have never been a champion of working class interests. They have at every turn stood in the way of those interests. So at election time, they like to play up to the workers. And it's to the eternal shame of the NDP that the NDP has left the working class to be preyed on by people like Pierre Poilievre. But if people are thinking of voting for the right, they should really look at what the right is all about throughout the world and throughout history. And you'll find it's very consistent. The right is looking for a muscular, deregulated capitalism where wealth gets to accumulate at the top and there's less rules on the bosses for what they can do to workers or to the environment or to families. It's to get the state, the government, out of the way of the rich. And so the rich can just treat us all like peasants. Now, that's like a thumbnail sketch. And the conservatives like to show you a different complexion of that. They like to zoom in on government waste and taxes and everything. But if you want to know where the resources in this country are going, they are not going to government programs or to harm reduction or something. There has been a massive transfer of wealth from everybody else to the very top, record breaking, even since the pandemic, huge. And the conservatives are not questioning that. They're trying to look in the other direction. Now, the other parties aren't doing a very good job of redistributing either. But at least the NDP wants to, or can be pressured to, or historically has done that. So yeah, I would look very seriously at it. It is too bad that Pierre Poilievre is willing to say that things are broken, because things are broken, and that other people aren't willing to say that so much. But it's always with him and the right. It's always a bait and switch that starts with a kernel of truth and then takes you to somewhere. Well, things are broken because, if you go to Trump, it's like because of immigrants or because of this or because of that, not because of the very people who are their right-hand man are running us into the ground at this sort of late stage capitalism. So, yeah, I guess that's the best I could hope for. I don't know how to break people if they're really deep into that cult, though. We're in hard times because the information ecosystem is so polluted with garbage. It's very hard to have a proper discussion. I'm at Crackdown. We're trying to think of what role should we play. You know, we have expertise in drug policy, but we also called this backlash, and we've been following the right, and we've been able to be pretty good on seeing some of these moves coming. So we're thinking about maybe we need to expand a little more into sort of drug policy related, but just a little bit further afield into politics, a little like the discussion we've all had here today.
Well, thank you, Garth. We are at time. I'm going to throw it back to Antoinette in just a minute here. But again, I think you've given us lots to think about, Garth, whether it's going to the ballot box or for speaking with our friends and neighbors in our communities, some specific tools, some tactics, and some ways to try to maintain that hope. And I do think there's something that's powerful about a bunch of people from coast to coast to coast spending some time together on a Sunday afternoon to speak about these issues. So I'm exceptionally grateful for your time, Garth. I can say you've already had a few pre-sales that can happen during the time that we've been here together. So things are moving in the right direction.
All right.
Everybody remember, subscribe to podcast, the Crackdown podcast. Look for Garth's.
Jay, I should tell you this.
Please.
I just got this message. The people at Penguin are saying any book that gets pre-ordered counts to the amount that's sold in the first week. And so to get a book on the bestseller list, they take a week snapshot, like a 1 week, and see how many books got sold. So if people pre-order it, it all counts for Tuesday to the next Tuesday. So like buy books, they say there's a shot at getting it onto some kind of lists and stuff. So I don't know. This is what the guy says. So I'm learning about this publishing as I go, but I appreciate you guys for ordering those. I really do. Thank you.
Well, I'll give you my word. I'm going to buy mine as soon as we hop off this call here today. I'll
Thanks,
do that.
man.
And I would encourage everyone to do the same. And Garth, for real, this has been a real genuine thrill. I have to admit, it was a little bit intimidating. I mean, someone to have such a degree of respect and reverence for, to be able to have the chance to have this conversation, engage with you like this, has been wonderful. I've really appreciated your time. I'm sure everybody has here. And on behalf of Mom Stop the Harm, thank you most sincerely. And I'll throw back to Antoinette to close us off. But again, Garth, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jay. And again, thank you. Such gratitude for all of the wisdom that you shared with us, Garth, both from the depth of the political climate that we're all navigating, and also just from a very real place inside of your heart for all of those places and experiences that you had that you shared with us. So again, I will say yes, go for it, pre-order Garth's book, and we're so thankful for the relationship with Mom Stop the Harm that we have with you. So thank you for always supporting us and giving us an opportunity to bring our voices forward in another way through your podcast and through your sharing. And again, congratulations on your son.
Thank you.
That will open up a whole new chapter of things that'll be very intriguing and interesting. I also wanted to thank Jay for fielding all the questions in the Q&A and for helping us stay on track with that, and for all of the wealth of experience that Jay brings. Also just wanted to mention that some of the political stuff that was brought up, we do have another, I popped it in the chat, we do have another Connect session coming up this Thursday. The title is Amplify Your Voice, Tools and Strategies for Effective Communication on the Unregulated Drug Crisis During the Federal Election. So if people are interested in jumping onto that, it's on our social media pages, it's on our website, and I also had popped in my email in there, and I can send you the link for that. So we thank you. And again, just to know that this is being recorded and it'll be up on our YouTube channel. So, and thank you again, Susie, for coming and opening us in a good way. So take care, everybody, and have a good Sunday night.
Thanks. Stay safe. Keep 6, everyone.
Thank you.